we introduce some cliches for different sections and subsections of research, whether it is your proposal, thesis or dissertation, or your paper. But this doesn't mean that you have to copy and paste. And using cliches, on the other hand, does not mean that you are copying and pasting. This doesn't mean that you are plagiarizing, okay? Because everybody can write the same cliche, the same sentence. So this is not plagiarizing something from someone. This is not stealing some sentence from someone else. But software, Authenticate or some other software plagiarism identifying softwares, do not recognize this this thing. Do not distinguish your well behavior from mal behavior. They think that, that software thinks that you are plagiarizing, okay? Because they just work on calculation. They just work on similarity of words and phrases. They don't know what is in your thought, okay? What is in your heart, okay? So we tell you, use the cliches, the fixed phrases everybody else is using. But this doesn't mean that I'm gonna force you to use them. You can use them less and devise or make your own sentences more. You can change them, you can paraphrase them, you can use synonyms and antonyms. You can use active sentences and passive sentences. You can use present tense and past tense. You can do different things actually to get rid of plagiarism, okay? But this, the use of cliches in its essence is not a kind of plagiarizing something. But the software considers it as a plagiarism, as a case of plagiarism. Okay, be careful. Use cliches, but be careful. If you wish to describe characteristics of your sample, you can use some cliches like this. Eligibility criteria required individuals to have received. This means that based on some criteria, we have to have our individuals, our sample, receive something. Then those who did not receive, we have to put them aside. Okay? We have to put them aside. We have to exclude them. A random sample of patients. Be careful with this. With X, with some qualities, was recruited. This means that some patients with some specific features, qualities, were chosen as our sample. Okay. Then the sampling was also random here. Okay. 47 students studying X were recruited for this study. Here, the number of participants, they were students, and they were, for example, studying physics. Okay. Just over half the sample, for example, 53% was female, of whom 69, for example, were married. 69% of 53. Okay. And the rest were not married, okay, were single. This means that you are talking about your sample. Of the initial cohort of 123 students, 66 were female and 57 male. This means that you can use some sentences like this to talk about your sample. Here some other phrases and cliches. Only children aged between 10 and 15 were included in this study. You talked about the age range. This is one criterion for inclusion in the study. You included only children aged 10 to 15. Okay. Eligible women who matched the selection criteria were identified. You have just selected women, and those women, and only those women who matched the selection criteria, not all women. Okay. Publications were only included in the analysis of if, for example, you want to do some review of literature, some meta-analysis work, okay, and in that case you wish to actually collect data from some publications, some research, some theses, books, and newspapers, and in that case your sample is publications, books, theses, papers, okay. And here you have some actually criteria. You say that the researcher said that publications were only included in the analysis if they had some criteria, some features, some qualities, okay. Otherwise we put them aside. Otherwise the researcher put them aside, okay. Articles were searched from January 1965 until April 2010. This means that you have collected data from articles, from publications, and those articles published only during this period of time, okay, from 1965 to April 2010, okay, some years. A systematic literature review was conducted of studies that here again you have done actually a meta-analysis, review of literature, and you're telling the readers that you collected data from some, for example, theses or dissertations published by ProQuest, available on some databases, for example, available on PubMed, for example. PubMed Central, available on Google Scholar, okay, or those which were indexed by, for example, Eric, okay, or published by Taylor and Francis. Here we have some other cliches. The students were divided into two groups. You are talking about how you divided your groups, your sample, based on their performance on some facilities, some actually features, some skills here. You're telling that I divided my groups, my participants, based on, for example, their physics score, okay, into two, okay, into half. All of the participants were aged between 18 and 19 at the beginning of the study. This means that we only selected people. It didn't tell that, I mean the researcher, or he or she didn't tell that his or her participants were male or female, but she or he told us the age of participants, their age, okay. You can tell their age, I mean, in the rest of your sentence, if necessary. In some cases, it is not necessary to tell the gender, their actually sex. But if necessary, you have to tell. Two groups of subjects were interviewed. We had two groups. Their names were X and Y. The first group were, for example, female students. The second group were male students. The project used a convenient sample of 32 first-year modern languages students. Here we have a convenient sampling procedure. We have a total of 32 students. They were freshmen, okay, first-year modern languages students, freshmen. Participants were recruited from 15 clinics. For example, we are going to do a medical research or a psychological research, then we have to select the participants from clinics. 15 clinics across Texas, for example. The initial sample consists of 200 students. The sample consists of 200 students, 75 of whom belong to minority groups. And the others, the rest. Semi-structured interviews were conducted with 17 male offenders with a mean age of 38 years. This means that we told the readers the type of interview, okay, the number of participants, the gender of participants, and the mean age of participants. Okay. All studies described as using some sort of X procedure were included in the analysis. Here we are gonna do a meta-analysis, collecting data from some texts, for example, some theses, dissertations, books, newspapers, papers, and something like that. In all cases, whether it is a person, a human being, or it is a subject or animal or something like this, we have a sample, we have a population, we might have a gender in some cases, we might have age range, then we might have average age. We have some criteria for inclusion, some criteria for exclusion. Okay, we should talk about all of them using some few sentences. Okay, so that the readers can do my research once again, recruiting the same sample, the same participants, using the same instruments, under the same circumstances, under the same conditions. Okay, using, for example, the same questionnaire, the same tests. The other researchers should be able to replicate my research to see whether my data is correct or not. Replication by this aim, to see whether my data is correct or not. So your methodology section should be thorough, should be detailed. You should tell them every minor detail so that they can be able to replicate.